So I'm going to break this into two different ways. We're going to talk about washing our eggs, but I'm going to present it to you from the standpoint of this is how we would do it in industry or things we need to think about. And then the second part is, okay, how do we translate what they do to what I can do? And so that way you can see both sides to see how they actually are very, very similar. So when we wash eggs, one of our main goals is that we want to eliminate any physical dirt. And so in a processing plant, when you watch the eggs run, they go through the washer, they go through the grater, they get packaged. If they are still dirty, the machine knows that that egg is still dirty. It goes to what is called a rewash belt. And it actually rides an escalator all the way back to the beginning, and it goes through the washer again. And so some eggs, because they can never be cleaned if they're coming from floor eggs that are really dirty, just ride the escalator all day long. And they either are broken eventually and they're removed, or the company will say, okay, we're going to keep tabs and every hour we clean every egg off the belt just because we know it's never going to get clean. So that's one way. So that's the first thing, is we're trying to eliminate that dirt. Reason is because when you open that carton of eggs, now if we were in Europe, it would be a little bit different because they don't wash their eggs. Most people do not want a giant turd staring at them when they open their carton, all right? If you do, it's cool, I'm not judging, but the majority of people do not. So we want to make sure we have clean eggs. That's what they're looking for. They want to make sure they look clean, they look similar in color. And the other thing we're trying to do is to make sure we're cleaning that shell to minimize any potential microbial contamination. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to go from this side with this dirt or stain and push them over then to that clean side. So we're going to do this with washing, and that's what we decided to do in the US. The US, Japan, and parts of Australia are the only 3 places in the world that wash and refrigerate eggs. Everybody else just stores them at room temperature in the middle of the grocery store or on the back of trucks, depending on what country you live in and how you buy your groceries. So when we wash our eggs, we want to make sure that we're thinking about the wash water temperature. We want to think about what is the water characteristics. So do we have a lead issue? Do we have a pH issue? So we're trying to think about everything that we're using to wash those eggs and how we're going to do it. Now when we do it, we want to make sure that we're maintaining at least 90 degrees Fahrenheit wash water temperature for our eggs. And however warm the eggs are, we want the wash water to be 20 degrees warmer than that. So if you are collecting your eggs and it's a really hot day and you would test your eggs and stick a probe into the center of the egg and it's saying it's 75 degrees, then you need at least 95 degree wash water when you clean your eggs. Now, why would we have to do this? If you want a really cool experiment to demonstrate the pour concept of eggs, take warm eggs and take really cold water and stir in some dirt or some soil so that it's silty and mucky looking, and take that really warm egg and put it into the cold water. And then after about 5 minutes, you pull it out and you break that egg open. When you look at the albumin, you'll actually see dirt particles in the albumin because the egg was hotter than the water. So it's going to open all the pores to try to pull in the cold water to equalize temperature. And so all that dirt then gets pulled into the pores. When we wash our eggs, if our water is hotter, then the way the egg is going to try to equalize is by pushing things out of the pores to try to equalize with temperature. And so if we have warmer water, we actually push things off the pores instead of pulling things in. So that's why we want to make sure we're maintaining that warmer temperature. Now, the one thing you do not want to do is to immerse your eggs, and actually it's a federal offense in the US, just so you all know, you could actually go to jail for it. But you do not want to immerse your eggs in water. And that is the sole reason is because typically people don't have it set up correctly, and we caused more food safety problems when we used to immerse our eggs in water than how we typically do it today. Now, we want to make sure that we're in a commercial egg washer, they actually have spray nozzles that are spraying water onto the eggs. And so we want to make sure that we're spraying water on the eggs the entire time. And then that wash water we want to change every 4 hours. So for most of you, depending on how many eggs you have, you probably don't have to worry about it too much. But if for some reason you have an awful lot of eggs that you're washing, you want to be changing your wash water fairly consistent so that you've got clean water that you're using over time. So when we look at egg washing detergents, and there's a lot to read on this slide, the important thing for you to recognize is that the Food and Drug Administration has to approve the type of detergents that we can use in the commercial egg operation. So there are egg soaps that you can buy that you can use to clean your eggs. And I'll give you another option of something that you can just do at home that will be sufficient for you to clean and sanitize your eggs. Now, the important thing to think about is when we're washing our eggs, though, we're trying to take that pH of around 10 or 11 is what we're shooting for with that wash water. And then we want to add our stuff to it so that we can clean it. And as we do this, then our goal is we're trying to make sure we get our eggs clean, but not to damage the cuticle of that shell too much. How many of you know what the cuticle is? Okay. How many of you know what the bloom is? Oh yeah, see, it's interchangeable words. Okay, cuticle is what we call it, but for some reason bloom has become the popular term. So it's that protective covering that the hen puts on the egg as it passes through the cloaca. And the reason she does that is to actually protect it from whatever is in the cloaca of the hen, because you have 3 body systems terminating in that one area. So she wants to protect that egg. The cuticle naturally will slough off within about 72 hours. So do not think that this bloom is the holy grail of things protecting eggs and it's there forever. Within 72 hours, it's gone anyway, but what we're trying to do is to minimize how much we actually lose during the washing process. Now, the one thing we know is that during the washing process, we're naturally going to remove that cuticle anyway with that brushing. Now, when we talk about it, and if you are organically producing eggs, there is a whole different ball game to play. Because not only can you not use the things that may be used by everybody else to wash eggs, you actually have to use things that have been approved by the National Organic Program. And so it's a whole different set of criteria that you have to abide by when you go to wash your eggs. Now, some of the things that you need to also keep in mind is you want to be aware of where's your wash water going. For most of you, if you have a small volume of eggs, it's probably not a big deal. It's going to go down the sink. But if you've got large volumes of eggs, you may just want to think about what are some other things I can do with that wash water? Can I use it anyplace else? Do I truly only need to send it down the sink? What's in it? So you just need to be aware that depending on your volume of water, there may be other things you can or cannot do with it. So once we would actually wash our eggs, then we would want to rinse them. So that way we've removed any soap or detergent off of those eggs. And if we're going to do that, we want to make sure, in this instance especially, that we're looking at that iron level, because we can actually discolor some of the internal contents by washing our eggs with high iron levels in the water. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that iron level in the water during the rinsing process. So when we're done and we're ready to rinse our eggs, we want to use typically a chlorine-based solutions, and we're looking at about 50 to 200 parts per million. And so we've done the math for you, so I'll give you a recipe. So if you want to do this, it's very easy and straightforward. Now, again, the same thing with eggs, just like when we talked before. If you want to use chlorine on your eggs, we need to make sure that we have sufficiently scrubbed them to remove any dirt prior to using it. Otherwise, we kind of inactivate the entire thing. And same with organics. Again, it's a whole different ball game. So if we're going to be producing organic eggs, we just have to accept the fact that we have a different set of rules to play by. And so you just need to be careful if you are saying, I am an organic egg producer, that you truly are playing by the rules, because if you get caught not playing by the rules, it's a much bigger ramification to you as a producer than by accepting the fact it's going to be a higher cost. All right, so that's large scale, very quick, broad overview. So how can you translate this then to what you're doing at home? So first and foremost, I want to make sure that you have some dedicated equipment that you're going to use to wash your eggs. I want you to make sure you're cleaning that equipment. And so when I mean clean, not only have you done something in between washing your eggs to clean it, but it's visibly clean. You can't see dirt still on the bristles or up at the very top where it's connected to the brush. So you've done everything to make sure it's as clean as possible, and then you've done something to sanitize it. And so when we talk about sanitizing, we're trying to make sure we're knocking down that microbial load. So I don't care what you've done to do it. If you've heated it up or dunked it in boiling water would be fine. Boil a pot of water, dunk your scrub brushes in there when you're done. That's one way that you could sanitize it from a microbial standpoint. We want to make sure we have potable water, and just like we would for commercial, you need to be checking your iron levels. So it may mean that if you have really high iron in your water, maybe you need to go buy bottled water when you clean eggs, just to make sure that you've got a better source of water to clean your eggs, to make sure you don't cause issues down the road. Now, temperature-wise, again, like we talked before, a minimum of 90 degrees. 120 is probably the max that you're going to have to run into, but 20 degrees warmer than that warmest egg. Now, for you can go ahead and just do the washing and sanitizing with just chlorine. So what we went through, and we did the calculation and then tested the solution to make sure it's where we want it to be for small flock people. So if you take 4 teaspoons of bleach and put it into a gallon of water, that will give you right around 200 parts per million chlorine. So that's the only equation that you have to take home with you to remember. That will give you 200 parts per million. So if you're doing that, again, every 4 hours, change that water. And what I mean from that standpoint isn't the fact that you necessarily have so many eggs that you're running eggs for 5 hours. It's that you started washing eggs, you went and did something else. Oh, and now I can come back and get to it again. Change that water, because we want to make sure that we haven't inactivated that chlorine over time. So we're still suggesting that every 4 hours you change that water. Now, I want your eggs to be room temperature. And so if you have been refrigerating your eggs, that means you need to take those eggs out before you're going to wash them, and then let them come to room temperature. And you can do that just by feeling the eggs. So when they don't feel cold to your touch anymore, that means you're good to proceed with washing your eggs. So if it was me, what I would suggest to you is have a dedicated refrigerator that you're going to store your eggs in, if at all possible. Go out and in the morning or afternoon when you collect your eggs, because I'm not sure that you would wash your eggs every day. Some of you may. Some of you may say, I'm only going to wash once a week. Collect your dirty eggs and store them on the bottom shelves of the refrigerator. Take them out, bring them to room temperature, go through the process here of cleaning them, put them in clean cartons, and store them on the top part of the refrigerator. And you can use that same refrigerator, because if you've got dirty eggs, at least they're on the bottom, and you've got your clean eggs on top. It's kind of counterintuitive to put all your clean eggs on the bottom and then put all your crappy eggs on top, because if something drips on them, now they've dripped on your clean eggs. So if you have a single refrigerator and you can dedicate it, that's how I would rotate your eggs through, and you can get away with just using one refrigerator. We already talked that you never submerge your eggs, and you want to have a continuous flow of water over your eggs or spray them. So your options are that you can either go through and take a spray bottle and you just mist your eggs, and it's going to be labor intensive, I'm not going to lie, but you mist your eggs and then you clean the eggs. The other is if you could just turn your sink on so that it's got a continuous trickle of water, and you put your egg under, you scrub it, put the egg back under, scrub it, put the egg back under. But somehow you want to have that continuous flow. And then in order to sanitize, you can either use a scrub brush or a clean cloth. It doesn't matter to us what you use, but then when it starts to look dirty, get rid of it and get a new one to continue cleaning your eggs. So that way you try to keep a clean contact surface with those eggs. So The next thing that we need to do, we want to make sure that we're drying our eggs before we put them into the cartons. If we don't do that, we can generate mold and some other things with our eggs, and so we need to make sure that they've been dried. And so you can either get disposable towels or again get a clean towel that's been sanitized, so washed and laundered. And then as you clean those eggs, then just take them and dry them with that towel before you put them into the clean egg or into the clean carton. And then once you have them in there, then you need to label them so you know the information, and then put them in the refrigerator until it's to be sold to the consumer. How many of you actually label your eggs before you sell them to people? How many of you actually just reuse cartons all the time? Okay, yeah, don't worry. You're not uncommon. So what I would encourage you to do, even if you don't want to listen to me and you want to reuse cartons, is develop some envelope labels and get them printed so you just have them stock. But I want you to start to put labels on your products. And the reason is because, and this is the big concern for commercial industry, and it's actually a concern for you as well. If there is ever a food safety outbreak and a trace back, they will use that carton to trace back to whoever it went to. So if you're reusing cartons and they all say Roseacre or Cal-Maine, or pick whichever large company you buy eggs from, and that's the trace back, all of that will be traced back to the commercial company, when in fact those eggs haven't seen or those eggs from that company have not been in that carton for over a year. So if you put your label on it, at least then if there's ever an issue, they can at least trace it back to you. Now that could be a pro or con. So, you know, I have lots of stories. So growing up, there was a 4-H kid that had ducks, and she sold duck eggs to a local family that was having a family reunion, and they made raw egg ice cream, and they got salmonella from it. They all got food poisoning. Traced it back to the duck eggs that were purchased from the 4-H kid. And this is something you all should be aware of, and if you're not, then listen. They sued the 4-H kid. And I do not know the outcome, but I know at one point it was to take everything from the family in the lawsuit. All of you that sell an egg are liable to be sued. Every one of you. It's just because you are selling a product to someone that if they would get sick and decide to turn around and sue you, you need to be aware of that. And so the conversations that we tend to have sometimes here with small flock people in Indiana is you need to be thinking about what are the insurance policies that I can or cannot get if I'm selling products to other people. Is there something that will cover me or not? And then you just have to understand there is a level at some point if something would ever happen, it does come back to you. If you're going to label your eggs, which I strongly encourage you to do, put your name, put your contact information, and then put your date of packaging. Especially if you're selling eggs to the consumers, it would be good for you to just write on your carton today's date, because that's the day you know that at least you packed the carton. So there's some level of comfort when the consumer goes to buy from you that, oh, okay, yeah, they packaged these yesterday, or wow, I can't believe they're selling me these eggs that are over a month old now. I wonder what's going on. Okay, so it's just a level of comfort and kind of assurance to those people. Briefly here, egg refrigeration. So I've already kind of shown you what it does from a quality standpoint and why we want to make sure we're doing it. So when we look at it, we have these isolates. So these were eggs that were swabbed to show you the different types of microorganisms that can be present on the shell eggs even after they've been washed. We can still find these types of things. And we see that we have a predominance of E. coli that can still persist on those eggs even though we've washed them. We know that they're clean, but it can still be there. And so it's something you've got to be aware of. Part of the reason that we're refrigerating is because we can suppress that microbial growth. And if we can suppress that microbial growth, that potential for food safety implications are going to be much lower. So we've talked about this cuticle or this bloom, and it does provide an antimicrobial barrier for about 96 hours. And the reason it's 96, as I said before, is at 72 is when we start to see it slough off. And so by 96, it's pretty much lost any antimicrobial impact that it can potentially have. And so during that washing process, then we're going to actually break it. So this is actually a picture of that cuticle. So you can see on the left side, the pores and the cuticles, covering those pores to reduce that diameter in size. And then on the right side, you can see how wide that pore is now that we've started to break that cuticle up and remove it entirely. So that's part of what it goes back to. Those E. coli can't get through those really small pores when the cuticle's in contact. As soon as it breaks open then and those pores become larger, now the E. coli can easily pass through into the inside. So when we talk about it then, we know that within that egg there are lots of barriers and lots of things that are in place to try to protect that egg from becoming a food safety nightmare. Because what is the end game of an egg? It's a chick, right? It's not for us to eat. It's something we found that's pretty good to eat. But at the end of the day, all these things are in place to make sure that that viable embryo can incubate and hatch a chick without being killed by whatever microbe is deciding to penetrate the shell. So when we talk about factors that influence that quality, we've already talked about the refrigeration. The other thing that can happen is that when we start to look at the amount of carbon dioxide, so actually when we hard boil our eggs, the reason we struggle to peel fresh eggs is because too much carbon dioxide is still present within the egg. And it creates a carbon-carbon bond when you cook it with the shell membrane. So when you peel, you actually peel chunks of albumin off. Now, for those of you that Instapot's the way to go. So all those hard-boiled eggs that we buy in the store that are already open, those are pressure cooked. That's how they get them to peel so easily at day of lay. Instapot does the exact same thing. When you pop that seal to break that pressure, it causes a major contraction of the inside contents of the egg and it pulls it away from the shell so you can easily peel them. So in case you don't have, that's one reason for an Instapot. I'm not promoting it, just saying. Okay, so when we talk about the quality, and if you've never really paid attention to your eggs, the egg on the left would be a very good quality. So you can look from the top, you can see the yolk, you can see that thick albumin ring around it, and then you see kind of the watery thin albumin on the outside. And if you were to get down and look at it from the horizon at the egg, you would see that you see like a step up from the thin albumin to the thick and then up onto the yolk, which sits very high on top. A very poor quality or a B grade egg is on the right side. So you can see now in the upper picture, you can hardly even differentiate that thick and thin albumin. They just kind of look like a giant water mess. And if we would look at it from the side, you would see you no longer have that big peak of the yolk on top. It's now depressed and it's just flat. And that's because as that thick albumin breaks down and more water infiltrates it, it spreads out and that yolk then starts to sink. And so what we're striving to maintain is the left side of the picture, not the right side. So what can impact this? Well, we know house temperature can. I talked about that. If it's hot, we want to collect it more often. Refrigeration, how we package and store our eggs are going to have an impact. So once we get them all cleaned, we want to get them into those cartons and back into the refrigerator so that we can maintain that high level of moisture within those eggs and not have that breakdown. Now, when we look at the humidity is really what we're talking about. So if we're under 60, we're going to actually dehydrate those eggs. And if we're over 80, we cause mold growth. So what is great about that carton is when you close that top, it actually creates a little microclimate within the carton. And so it actually helps keep the moisture content higher within that carton because it's a controlled environment within a much bigger controlled environment, the refrigerator. So it actually works to your favor to keep them inside a carton from a grading standpoint. So as that egg ages then, we see that we have this, the water will start to move amongst the different components. And so when we get to that B grade and we have that vitellin membrane that just all over the pan when we break it and ruptures, it's because we've had more water infiltrate into the yolk. And so there's more pressure on that membrane. and it just busts when we finally break those eggs open. So carbon dioxide and moisture loss, same thing. So we talked about the CO2, and it's always trying to find that equilibrium. So if you were hard boiling your eggs in hot water, the way we always did it and the way I did it until I got an Instapot is I'd actually set my eggs on the counter overnight, so I had a whole bunch of moisture loss and CO2 being expelled, and then I would boil them the next day and they typically peeled just fine. So it's just recognizing all the different things within the egg that influence what happens when we cook it.